Hi there, and after a long delay I'm pleased to release my latest video, this time dealing with a build of the Combrig 1/700th resin kit of HMS Ajax. Ajax was the third of four King George V class dreadnought battleships built for the Navy in the early 1910s. They represented such a great advance over Dreadnought herself, completed only 6 years earlier, that they were dubbed super dreadnoughts by the popular press. After commissioning in 1913, she spent the bulk of her career assigned to home and grand fleets, took part in the Battle of Jutland in 1916 but sustained no damage, and spent the rest of her service during the war routinely patrolling and training in the North Sea. After the war, she was assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet, which is what you can see in the photograph here, and she was placed in reserve in 1924 before being sold for scrap 2 years later in accordance with the terms of the Washington Treaty. Amongst the naval modelling fraternity, Combrig have a reputation for producing very well moulded kits, rather let down by shortcomings such as poor packaging, vague instructions and inadequate photo etch provision. Now, the kit here provides an almost classic example of that. It's packed in a very thin cardboard box with the hull bouncing about inside, poorly restrained by some polystyrene chips that offer little protection but plenty of annoying dust particles. The box states HMS Ajax Battleship 1912. The photograph tallies with that, as does the reproduction of the drawing on the front of the instruction sheet. Unfortunately, the kit doesn't. It doesn't include torpedo nets and booms, and it has a later style rig. It appears to be about right for the time of Jutland, but certainly not for 1912. Not critical faults, but just a bit of sloppiness that could have been avoided with some more careful research. When we look at the kit, we see some very nicely moulded parts that appear to fit together well. This is what you expect from Combrig. The photo etch fret is good as far as it goes, but isn't extensive enough, I don't think. No deck rail is included. Okay, not everybody uses that in 700th scale, but really davits, anchors, chains, they should be there. The davits and anchors are represented in resin and are so fine that they break almost while you look at them. They're useless, frankly, and really should have been on that brass sheet, shouldn't they? The quality of the moulding of the larger components is evident here. The deck planking may look a bit overdone, but once primed and painted it looks surprisingly effective. The positions for the boat chocks on the shelter deck are nicely marked, and this is helpful because there's a lot of them to fit. The way to go with these kits is to complete the main components as sub-assemblies, paint them and then put the whole thing together. You can see the instructions here are a bit basic, but they do pretty well give you that message. The aim is to assemble enough to make painting as easy as possible, but not so much that awkward areas are left that are difficult to reach. Everyone knows that the necessity of this type of build is some delicate paintbrush work. It's impossible to complete these projects by airbrushing alone. This may be a bit off-putting to some potential builders, but it really shouldn't be. A bit of practice and decent quality brushes may give surprisingly good results. 4 sub-assemblies can be done before painting begins. The photo etch boat chocks can be added to the shelter deck, together with the numerous davits that will need fabricating from brass wire. I used 0.3mm on my build, but in fact 0.2 might have been better. The bridge superstructure and foremast can be done, with the upper portions of the mast replaced with brass wire, as you can see in the photo. Fit of parts was good, but the searchlights were a real fiddle. They are very small and very difficult to position. The aft superstructure was also built. It's a simpler structure, but still mounts those fiddly searchlights. The turrets and main guns were also assembled. These go together well, but you do need to put a short section of etched ladder to the side of B and X turrets, which is indicated in the Burt drawing on the plan included in the kit. Everything was primed with Halford's grey plastic primer before being given an overall coat of my chosen grey, which was Humbrol Matte 64. Time has come now for the hand painting sessions. Everyone knows that kits like this require some delicate brush painting. It shouldn't put you off. All it needs is a bit of care, a bit of practice and some decent quality brushes. The wooden deck, represented with Vallejo Panzer Aces 315 light mud, went on next. It goes well over the grey primer, giving a rather uneven coverage, which in fact is just the effect we want. You can see the deck painting underway here. The acrylic paint goes on in 2 coats, and then a bit of subtle staining using Carr's modelling powders finished the job. While we're looking at this picture, if you look at the bottom one, at the stern of the ship, you can see the stern walk. This is a delicate photo-etched assembly. It looks really good, but if you put it on too early, like I've done here, it is very prone to damage. Best tip is to leave it off until much later in construction. Once the main decks are completed, then it's time to look at the linoleum covering on the higher decks. I represented this with Vallejo model colour 70871 leather brown. This was perhaps a bit too dark in retrospect, but was still acceptable. The interiors of the open top boats were coloured with brown weathering wash from Flory models. This was something of an experiment, but it actually worked quite well. Once it comes to the main assembly, I began from the bow and worked aft. Etched metal anchors and chains were added from the spares box. The hawse pipes will need drilling out to accommodate these, incidentally, and all of the sub-assemblies fitted well, although the funnels were a bit tight in their slots due to the thickness of the paint. Some light weathering of each unit was done using Flory Model's dark dirt before being fitted to the hull. The 4-inch gun barrels were fabricated from 0.3mm brass wire, and the various boats hung from the davits. The exact positioning of the ship's boats involves some research and a bit of guesswork. The Burt book has a diagram of an as-completed Audacious, a sister ship of Ajax, and shows more boats than are included in this kit. The inside cover of Burt has a watercolour drawing of Audacious again, which provides an interesting colour guide and distribution pattern for the boats, which is different to the one in the drawing, but is actually the one I tried to replicate here as far as possible. The model is now essentially complete, and a decision needs to be made about deck rail and rigging. I think it's quite acceptable to leave off both and still have an attractive model. But if you want to take the more difficult option, the knack is to do just enough to be representative without trying to add everything. In terms of deck rail, only the very finest will do. I use Gold Medal Models Gold Plus railings, which are the finest available and not actually quite as difficult to use as it may first appear. The other brands of 700th scale deck rail I've seen are invariably too thick and are best not used at all if they're the only ones you can find. Rigging, rather a similar story. Just a few strands of the finest stretched sprue was used to rig the cranes and some of the yards. The jackstays were added fore and aft from 0.2mm brass wire, and the ensign came from the sheet produced by Starling Models. I was pleased with the finished model, which turned out okay despite the various shortcomings of the kit. Despite my grumbles, I suppose ship modelers should be grateful that a company in Russia is producing just about the only examples of World War I British dreadnoughts on the market. Let's hope they keep up the good work, whilst at the same time taking some heed of the suggestions for possible improvements. Recently I know that Flyhawk are making a good attempt to fill in some gaps in the market. I've got 1 or 2 of those in my stash, and hopefully we'll do a build on one of those fairly soon. It'll make an interesting comparison, won't it? So thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope you found this little presentation useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you and goodbye.